I think. Oh, there we go. We were recording. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to introduce myself again. I was talking in the last one. My name is Joe Yount. I'm an architect at Ratio Architects. And I've got Annie Hollabaugh, who's an interior designer at Ratio, and Lora Teagarden, who's another architect at Ratio. So this is the architecture and interior design panel discussion. And just to kind of start off, who is the architect and who is the interior designer? And generally, architects and interior designers are sort of the lead in the design process. We usually work with an owner to understand their needs. Sometimes the owner gives us a program. We kind of work with them and their users. So if it's an office, we kind of work with their employees to understand what they need. If it's a hospital, sometimes we're working with the nursing staff to understand, how the typical floors need to flow certainly as well as leadership. But once we sort of have that information, we kind of design the project, and then we also will kind of coordinate and lead our mechanical and engineering consultants, and we'll kind of help them figure out where we can and can't, put air ducts and electrical outlets and where we need them and things like that. And then ultimately, we put together a set of drawings and tell the contractor how to build it. So that's kind of a brief overview of what we do, kind of how it feeds into our last discussion with the owner. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annie and Lora and just ask you, what's your background and how did you become an architect or an interior designer?
Well, I can start off. So, from the youngest age that I can remember and pictures that show younger than that, I've been one to draw in color. And my mom would say that I was always the most at ease when I was doing that or when I was outside playing in the yard and building things. Um, and unlike most kids who would draw, like cars or plants or pets, I was always drawing buildings. And I didn't know that that was something that was unique. So they kind of fostered that. And then in about fifth grade, I think I learned that you could actually get paid to draw buildings for a living. And the rest is kind of history, as they say. I was lucky to go to a high school that had a drafting class. So that helped that process along. But yeah, I just kind of always leaned more towards the design side of that versus engineering or versus construction. Not to say that an architect can't be involved in all aspects of that, but yeah.
Ms. Laura, how about you, Annie?
Yeah, so my dad is a landscape architect turned city planner, and my mom is an architect, and she's also an entrepreneur. So I just feel like I've always been exposed to it. I've always been around it. In high school, my mom, she was working with an interior designer on one of her projects and asked, "Hey, do you have anything for Annie to do?" And sure enough, she did. So I started out unloading boxes and processing and tagging accessories and furniture that she would use to sell clients. And eventually I ended up working alongside her and decided it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And ultimately went to Indiana State and got my degree in interior design. So it was kind of a progression. It seemed like a really natural progression. She was a residential interior designer. So when I was in school, I ultimately decided to shift more to the commercial side. So working more with public, doing more university, college buildings, and then also library design is kind of where I've been shifting my focus to more recently.
Great. So I'm an architect too, and work with both of you on a pretty regular basis. And something that I talk about sometimes is that architecture and interior design can be really kind of a gray area. Is that usually on one hand, architects are designing the exterior wall, and on the other hand, the interior designers are selecting colors that they don't teach us about in architecture class, but to you guys, what do you kind of see as, mostly the realm of architecture? What's the realm of interior design? And how do they sort of blend together in the middle and cross over and, basically work with each other?
Yeah, I think so. Commercial interior designs, it's pretty new compared to architecture. I feel like it really started to develop in, the mid 1800s versus I feel like architecture and engineering has been around since, I mean, you look back at, the Greek temples and things like that. So design today, I think as we know it, was really established in, the 1900s when print and magazines and books were more widely distributed to the public. So I feel like it's really evolved as a profession where it was mostly focused on finishes and furniture, and it's starting to kind of bleed, Joe, kind of as you alluded to with the gray between architecture and interior, where we're starting to look at layout and we're starting to it's just solving problems with I mean, just whatever the client really needs. I mean, we're looking at casework. We're working with, different types of doors and hardware and glazing systems, but mostly all on the interior. But there is that crossover with the architect where we're having to coordinate a lot with the mechanical and the electrical and plumbing, and we're working together to try to figure out where the different what is the best paths within the building where we can, put these different systems. And then also, I mean, the architect is very in tune with the exterior and the site, and a lot of times they're working with the civil engineers and the landscape architects, so they kind of become like the middle person where we can start to talk about how we want the interior to relate to the exterior when it comes to natural daylight, sun. You've got your different brightnesses with, your east sun, your south sun, your north sun, etc. And then also just your views too. So, I mean, what you're going to see, where you might want to position built like spaces that look out, maybe, better looking landscapes. So that's kind of where I see a lot of the gray, and how, we kind of tend to overlap a little bit there, but there's a lot of collaboration involved for sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would echo that. I mean, I think if you look at it historically, the architect as master builder was a scenario that I think has continued into how you approach the learning process and the licensure process for architecture. So, we take on a lot more liability in the process of your education, and through your licensure, they're literally training you as an architect to be able to do anything. So I can do the mechanical drawings myself, should I choose to. I can do all of the structural calculations, should I choose to. If I were to be a sole proprietor and own my own business and be doing work that is commercial work, I could do all of those things. So there's a lot more education that goes into it because I hold that potential to either do a lot of great stuff or cause harm. So you have to kind of you're required to learn about those things so that you hopefully don't cause harm. The gray area that Annie is speaking to, I think, does come into play when you get into especially larger scale situations in commercial firms, and or even just a general increase in that collaboration. You think of Frank Lloyd Wright, who would pick out his own colors and design his own furniture, but an architect today is a lot more likely to understand the importance of collaboration because two brains are better than one. Like Annie is constantly researching and looking up up-to-date ideas and trends and materials as it relates to interior specifications or what the interior of a project looks like. And that allows me to free up brain space to look at what's important for the wall system or what's important for all of these other things. So that collaboration definitely has advantages.
And if you saw my grades and structures in college, you wouldn't want me sizing your beams. That's why we have structural engineers, which we can talk about in a later session. But so we talked a little bit about the educational path and some of the liabilities associated with architecture. But can you talk a little bit about what the educational path looks like for an architect and interior designer? And if you know off the top of your heads which schools have architecture programs, I think that there's a couple in Indiana. There's usually a couple in every state, but I think that you can probably count each one on one hand. So Start with you, Laura.
Yeah, so architecture actually has a variety of paths, especially more of late. The national body that helps make sure that we're learning what we need to do has been increasing your options as it relates to what your education and licensure process looks like. So historically, it was a 5-year bachelor degree that provided you with a professional degree, which is the important part. It has to be a professional accredited degree. In about 2004, they started looking into programs that would allow for it to be a combination of a 4-year pre-professional plus 2-year master's program. So the master's program portion is what provided you with that professional degree. They also then opened it up to have a 3-year master's degree for people who didn't have a pre-professional in architecture. Some schools now were, 15 plus years into what that process looks like. They're starting to think about what that means as it relates to other options in the path to licensure. So some schools are going back to offering the 5-year as well as the 4+2. Some schools are offering an integrated path to licensure, which is a relatively new scenario. So that typically takes about 7 years, but by the end of it, you have completed not just your education portion, but you've also completed your tests towards licensure. So for comparison, typically the average time that it takes for someone to get licensed to take the 6 tests that you have to take as it relates to getting your license in architecture, it takes about 2.5 years once you decide to sit down and start studying. So that 7-year window isn't an ungodly process. It just makes your education path and perhaps your student loans look different because it is a longer span of schooling. So that's that process. Ball State historically was the in-state state school that provided architecture as it relates to Indiana. IU now has a master's program, and they're looking at rolling out an undergraduate program, or at least they were before COVID. I'm not sure where they stand in that process now. And Notre Dame, as a private school, has their own program. Each of those programs offer something that is completely different from each other. Ball State is a very technical program, so you graduate understanding the nuts and bolts of how buildings go together and the important aspects of that with a good understanding of theory and design work. Notre Dame is historically a very historical college, so they look a lot at historic preservation and classical architecture. IU is theory-based. It's a liberal arts college, so they tend to think a lot about what impacts the environment, what impacts the people and the spaces, and how architecture plays a role in that.
Yeah, so with interior design, it's typically a 4-year degree. And then it does kind of vary because within interior design, you do have kind of the residential realm and then you've got the commercial realm. So residential typically doesn't require, it depends, it really does vary by state, the different requirements. But for best practice, if you're going to be practicing design, especially commercial design, they're going to ask that you take a national exam to receive certification, and that's made up of 3 exams after you get your degree. And then you also need to complete so many hours professionally. And then after you get that certification, you can then register with the state that you work. And so while that doesn't really give you the opportunity to stamp your own drawings, it does give you street cred. And like I said, it really is best practice. And then in terms of schooling, because interior design is relatively new and just the standards are constantly evolving, I would highly recommend that you go to CETA. And so you'll want to make sure that whatever program you go to is it's a CETA certified program or accredited program, excuse me. And basically this is just an organization that goes through to the different universities, and it's a very rigorous set of standards that the school programs, the interior design programs, need to pass in order for them to. It'll just basically set you up to when you are ready to go out and get a job and to take your exams, you've had the necessary education. So definitely look ahead of time because almost all schools in Indiana. I mean, I think Ivy Tech, IUPUI, Indiana State, IU, Purdue, Ball State, everyone has, it seems like, some sort of an interior design program, but just make sure that you do your due diligence and make sure that it is a CETA accredited program. So, and that's CIDA.
CIDA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's kind of interesting is that Andy rattled off a bunch of schools. It sounds like we probably have more schools in the state of Indiana that have interior design programs than we do architecture right now. I know that I think Ivy Tech and IEPUI are both in Indianapolis, and Ball State also has a presence in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not actually have to leave home to do any of this stuff, but Lora, you mentioned the 3-year degree. Something to keep in mind between our ACE scholarships and any other scholarships. If you can manage to pull off a full ride to IU, Purdue, Ivy Tech, you can take that interior design degree and then get a 3-year master's degree, and hopefully they'll figure out that it should be less than that at some point, because there is so much gray area. But you can get in basically within 7 years you get 7 years of tuition, or trying to figure out how to say this. So basically, you pay for 3 instead of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you also have the benefits of the interior design education, which is going to teach you some things that you're not going to learn about in college or for architecture. So, I think that's the flexibility that the interior design path gives to sort of go into an architecture path is something to really consider pretty strongly.
Yeah,
And
and to piggyback. Sorry, go ahead, Lora.
I was just going to say, you can look into and see what, if you're looking heavily at a school, some schools offer dual degrees as an undergrad, or like something that would provide you with a minor in one or the other. I know Ball State at the time that I went there had some variety of a dual degree, where you could get your architecture degree and then have like a minor in interior design, or also be taking those classes.
You're saying, Annie?
Yeah, no. So I think design is such a broad. There's such a broad spectrum to it, and it seems like a really exciting time to be in design. And if you were to get like some sort of a design undergrad degree, there are so many different master's programs out there that you can kind of splinter off from. Even just like sustainable design or community design or city planning. There's so many different fields that you could go into to just expand your breadth of design. It can transfer in so many different ways too, so highly recommend you kind of that internet rabbit hole and looking at different programs that are out there. And you never it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. It seems like with sustainability in general, it's a pretty exciting time. So getting a design degree, it could be a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a good rabbit hole to go down. Avoid the flat Earth rabbit hole. That's a bad one. So, um, but just for a more fun question, what excites you about your career? Just in your day-to-day career, what gets you going?
Go for it, Laura. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yep. So I love solving puzzles, and to me, that's a lot of what architecture is. There's the puzzle of how this building, how this space gets put together, but there's also the puzzle of how the people use the space, and what their needs are, or what communities are going to be in that space, and what that means as it relates to how they interact with that built world. So making sure that I'm creating this built kind of 3D puzzle that then not only solves the needs that they perhaps came to me with, but also needs that they didn't know that they had. like that's the most inspiring and the most exciting piece of architecture to me.
Thanks, Laura. How about you, Annie?
Yeah, I think similarly. So the challenge is huge. I mean, every day is different. You're constantly learning. You don't know it all. You definitely don't know it all when you get out of school. And I feel like every day I'm learning something different. I had mentioned the spectrum of design before, and I mean, that applies to this as well, because with interior design, you can get down to literally like the nuts and bolts of a detail where you're looking at the hardware that goes on the casework. But then we're even beginning to see interior design evolve into this larger scale where you have to consider where the finishes are coming from and what are the chemicals and toxins that are put into those and how that affects the ultimately the end user. But then you also have to look at how they're manufactured, where they're manufactured, what's the energy that they're needing and the water consumption needing, the pollution that's happening. So these are things that we're all starting to ask more. We've been asking these questions for a while now, but I do feel like there is a resurgence of that, and there is a push from the industry to be more responsible with what it is that we're selecting and specifying on our projects from an environmental and a human health. So I mean, it seems like there's just so much to consider. It's quite a challenge. It's a really exciting time. I mean, also having to continue to work on soft skills like talking and listening, just because you work with so many people. And I would say that's the other thing that I really like about this career path is you're working with I get to work with Joe and Laura on projects, but then I also get to work with civil engineers and mechanical engineers and structural engineers. And then you've got the client over here. And sometimes you need to bring in, some specialty design people like acousticians who help us with the acoustics. So you're constantly communicating and balancing and ideas and it's really wonderful to be able to push yourself to continue to improve communication and relationships. So it's every day is a different day.
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of interesting comment about the different people that you work with and the relationships and the soft skills, because one thing again, this is sort of gets further into the interior design realm than the architecture, is that you are really working with people who are going to directly use your space. So if you think about designing a science lab or something, you're probably talking with the science teacher in the lab departments.
Absolutely.
And figuring out where they need a sink and how they want to run their classroom on a day-to-day basis. Now, you can do that as an architect, but really, that one-to-one interaction with the people that are actually going to use the space, a lot of times that's sort of a detail level thing that happens at the interior design level. And I think you have go ahead.
Oh no, finish your thought, please.
I was going to segue. So.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Well, because I think you had a kind of a nice little segue about you're paying attention to what we have in our products, and I wanted to ask both of you, where do you see these professions headed in the next 10, 15 years, and what are going to be the issues that we're facing when our ACE students come out of school? What's the profession going to look like? Or we'll start with you.
Oh, go ahead,
Annie, no, you're starting.
No, please.
No, yeah, go Annie, because you had started on this kind of conversation.
Okay. Well, I do think that the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a revitalization on sustainability and thinking about, human health and environmental health. But I do think that with the year 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protest, we're beginning to see an awareness and a focus shift more towards alleviating disparities between Black and brown communities and wealthy white suburbs. So I'm hopeful that design will continue to push the envelope in terms of social design, looking at economic development, considering health, education, racial equality, equity, diversity, inclusion. I hope that we're able to push our clients to think about these things. I hope that we're able to continue to collaborate and be community focused. more so than we already are, because this is an issue. And I think that we're beginning to see, just how much of an issue this really is. So that's where I hope design is headed in the next 10 years, to become even more holistic.
Absolutely. How about you, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Annie said. The American Institute of Architects, which is like the national architecture version of the Bar Association for lawyers, is an easy way to think about it. So um, they have been putting together all sorts of sustainability resources and all sorts of equity resources back since the mid 70s. And that stuff obviously continues to evolve as we learn more. But in more recent years, have been trying to encourage architects and architecture firms around the nation to make commitments towards carbon neutrality, or thinking about the energy that we use and the energy that our buildings use, because the process of making a building and then using a building takes up a huge amount of carbon. It takes up a huge amount of energy. Um, so they've really been pushing towards that. And obviously, as Annie mentioned, um, the increase in social justice awareness is long overdue. We are thankfully starting to more fervently have these conversations, which is really important. And they're conversations that are, they don't change. A big ship doesn't turn on a dime, right? So we have to keep having these conversations, and these are conversations that these future generations are going to have to keep having. What I think is going to be really interesting is the intersection of those two ideas. So there's a lot of research that shows that marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by unsustainable design, or by having manufacturing plants put in their space just simply because there are people who aren't thinking about protecting their space and what that clean air means, or what those materials and that environmental impact mean. So there's that intersection, and there are intersections as to how they use space, or the spaces that are provided to them. So that kind of social and sustainable intersection is a really key piece to how we need to start thinking about design right now, or a year ago, or from the dawn of age, to actually start to move forward in a healthy way.
Nicely said.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Agree.
Something that we kind of find interesting about ACE is that um, we're particularly I mentor at Arsenal Tech. We're trying to mentor at schools that are inside the city, because one of the things that we talk about diversity a lot is that we need different ideas that are coming from different places to solve problems that um, seem to keep repeating themselves over the years. And just as an example, I grew up out in the suburbs, and a lot of houses in the suburbs are actually typical plans. They get subdivided by a lot, but these are pre-designed houses. And most of what we do as architects, we're designing one-off custom solutions that is very program specific. So it's someone needs an office. An office for a law firm may have a lot of closed offices for private conversations, whereas an office for well, an architect office is going to have a lot of open desks. We might have a couple of students who get to see a virtual tour of some of these offices, but um, you know, um, me growing up in the the suburbs, and, a lot of things are just sort of pre-manufactured templates. I'm not going to be quite as familiar of, the density of an urban setting where a lot of the projects that we're designing are going to end up. Now, a lot of them are going to be on sort of greenfield sites, but, then again, you're taking away farmland, or taking away other good land. So these are things that we all need to be thinking about. And that's why, diversity is important, because you don't want, just people like me who grew up out in the suburb to be designing urban projects, because I had to learn a lot about how urban environments work in order to design them. So I think that's one of the great things about what we do.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think Arsenal is a perfect example for what that looks like from a sustainability and social impact space
Yeah.
because it began its life as an armory,
Mhm.
and now it is something completely different that is helping shape the minds of the future. And the most sustainable building is the building that's already built. So how do we start thinking about what's happening in these kind of urban landscapes and old manufacturing centers that we no longer need, or what those different spaces look like? I mean, Andy and I are very aware of kind of the architecture around Arsenal. We both live less than a half mile from the
East
campus.
side.
Yeah.
Me too.
Oh, that's
So
right. That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Windsor Park.
Um, so
Sorry
that
to our other 5 schools.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
didn't realize what I did here. So I guess kind of just with closing comments. Do you have any closing comments that you want to share with the next generation of architects and interior designers?
I mean, I think we want you at the table. We design is all about problem solving, and I think a lot of the conversations that I've been hearing lately, especially when it comes to social justice, is I mean, it's more than just solving for aesthetic and physical, right? It's moving to be more social, and that it's thought that the people who are closest to the problem are the ones who are the closest to the solution. So we need different voices at the table. We need to we want the diversity, we want that inclusivity, and it's an exciting time to be a designer. So yeah, hope to see you around one of these days.
Yeah,
Thanks for your time.
I would echo that. I mean, the best design takes in the most varied opinions from the most diverse minds, because it means that you're thinking about every single type of person who will use that space. So it takes people who look completely different from Annie and Joe and I, in addition to us all sitting at the table together, figuring it out. And not just sitting at the table, but like out in the community,
Mm-hmm.
figuring it out with the community. So it we can continue to improve what our communities look like, but we have to do it together.
Yeah, all the way from, just individual spaces within a building to the building itself to, the fabric and the streets and just the overall community. So, I mean, I think that we have the opportunity to impact that change and to be the voice there and the kind of the guiding force there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for both of your time.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. And oh, I'll see you guys again soon. So,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
thanks to all the mentors, and that's architecture. So we'll see you guys later.
And interiors.
And cheers.
All right. Thank you
All right,
guys.
thanks.
See you
Appreciate it.
guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Stop the recording.